Good afternoon, Dr. Ho. Today I'll be presenting on the water cycle. Just to give a brief introduction of the class profile, this would be for P5 Standard Science class with students of mixed readiness and who are visual and kinesthetic learners. This is the contents for my presentation. First, I will give an overview and the rationales for the design of my teaching package, followed by demonstrating one teaching activity that I plan to conduct in my second lesson. The class of 40 would be divided into 8 groups of 5 for the inquiry-based teaching that will take place in the science laboratory for both lessons. According to Vygotsky's social constructivist theory, social interaction plays a crucial role in cognitive development, hence the arrangement for students to work in groups. In the first 1-hour lesson, I would introduce the topic by engaging students using See Think Wonder activity. I would draw examples of nature like rain, water puddles disappearing, and clouds to stimulate students' natural curiosity and motivate them to learn. As for lesson development, I would encourage students to practice the Predict, Observe, Explain routine in their guided discovery learning. Individual groups will set up 2 models, a beaker containing hot water covered with a transparent lid to observe evaporation, and a beaker of cold water to observe condensation. Teacher would also demonstrate the process of transpiration by showing students a potted plant wrapped in a transparent plastic bag. During the explore phase, teacher would act as a facilitator who would provide students with prompting questions to guide their thinking. Thereafter, during the explain phase, students would reflect critically on their observations and link them to natural scenarios. Example, relating their observation of condensation with the formation of clouds in nature. During the elaborate phase, Think Pair Share activity would be conducted where students would consider the importance of the water cycle. Then, teacher would volunteer some student pairs to share their answers with the class and present their responses in the form of a concept map on the whiteboard. This is to benefit visual learners and to model for students how to consolidate their thinking and produce their own concept maps in the future. To summarize the lesson, students will be shown a YouTube video, the water cycle. Lastly, for the evaluate phase, teacher would get students to write down 2 things they used to think and 2 things they now think on their exit tickets to assess their understanding and use the feedback gathered to close up any learning gaps in future lessons. In the next half an hour lesson, teacher would start by recapping on the concepts taught in the last lesson to better equip students to take on the inquiry-based learning in this lesson. For the engage phase, teacher would use a story with illustrations to present a real-life problem for students to solve. When students are shown how knowledge of the water cycle can be applied in real life, it would make learning more meaningful to them. For lesson development, students are to work in their groups to find a way to obtain clean drinking water from seawater. This would train their creative problem-solving skills. Some groups will then present their answers to the class for discussion. During the explore phase, students would carry out the experiment and make their observations. This promotes experiential learning that would deepen their understanding and enhance memory retention. In the explain phase, teacher would show students a pre-recorded video of the experiment to scaffold their learning and guide them in explaining their observations. Finally, for lesson conclusion, students would write down 3 things they have learned about evaporation and condensation on their exit tickets. This allows students to reinforce their learning and for teacher to evaluate students' understanding and use their responses to guide subsequent instructions. Students should already know how water moves through the water cycle, that evaporation and condensation are 2 processes that allow the water cycle to repeat itself. the factors affecting the rate of evaporation, and the importance of the water cycle. The learning objectives for this lesson are to recognize that only water gains heat and evaporates into water vapor, leaving behind all other things in the solution or mixture. Secondly, to apply the concepts of evaporation and condensation to solve a real-life problem. Due to time constraint, I will not be using oral questioning to elicit responses during the recapping of concepts learned in the last lesson. So to recap on the water cycle, water gains heat from the sun and evaporates to form water vapor. Water vapor rises up and condenses to form water droplets, which then gather together to form clouds. As small water droplets gather to form clouds, they get heavier and fall as rain, which is a form of precipitation. Rain flows back into rivers, lakes, and seas, and the water cycle repeats itself. To recap on the importance of the water cycle, I would be showing students the same concept map I've constructed in the last lesson. Now the teaching activity demonstration starts here. For today's lesson, let me start by telling you a story. One day, Carl went fishing at sea. Suddenly, the skies darkened and there was a thunderstorm. Boom! Clap! After the thunderstorm had ended, Carl found himself stranded on a deserted island. He felt thirsty, but the only water he could find was the seawater surrounding the island. Do you think Carl will be able to drink seawater to quench his thirst? Let's find out. Seawater is just too salty to be drunk. So Carl looked around the island, hoping to find something useful. These were all the items he could find: a large plastic container, a small plastic container, cling wrap, and some ice cubes. How would he use them to get clean drinking water? In your groups, you have 6 minutes to discuss how you would set up an experiment using the 4 items to obtain clean drinking water from seawater. Remember to draw, label, and explain your experimental setup in your activity worksheets. Let us see how the water cycle can help. Just to recap, these are the items available on the island. This would be the experimental setup. Now check if it is the same as what your group had discussed. If it is any different, I want you to redraw the entire diagram in green pen and label the items accordingly. Now each of you would have received a hard copy of these procedures. Let us go through each step together. First, you would fill 1/4 of the large plastic container with dyed water that had been heated. Then, you place the empty small container in the middle of the large container. Cover the opening of the large container using a cling wrap. Make sure you do not pull taut the cling wrap. Then, place 5 pieces of ice cubes on the cling wrap directly above the small plastic container. Start the stopwatch. After 5 minutes, record and explain your observations. To observe the inside of the small container more clearly, remove the ice cubes and cling wrap. Then take the small container out of the large container. I believe all of you have completed your observations, but to make things clearer, let us observe the experiment by watching a recording of it together. Now I want you to focus on the drop of water underneath the cling wrap in the middle of the ice cubes. You can see it dripping into the small container. Okay. As you can see, the water in the small container is colorless, unlike the green seawater. What happened in the experiment? Water gains heat and evaporates to form water vapor. What do you think will happen next? When water vapor comes in contact with the cooler underside of the cling wrap, it loses heat and condenses into water droplets. What do you think will happen to the water droplets? The water droplets drip into the small plastic container and are collected as clean drinking water. Now, some questions to ponder about. First, why is the seawater dyed green? What do you think is present in seawater that makes it unsuitable for drinking? So, the green dye represents salt and other impurities in actual seawater, which is made visible for us to make observations. Second, what was the purpose of heating the seawater prior to the experiment? As you have learned in the last topic on water and changes of states, heat increases the rate of evaporation. How did we direct the water droplets under the cling wrap to drip into the small container? By putting some ice cubes on the cling wrap directly above the small container. Would the ice increase the rate of condensation? Explain your answer. Yes, the ice cubes would remove heat from the cling wrap, causing it to be much cooler for water vapor to lose heat and condense at a faster rate. Now, take a post-it note and write down 3 things you have learned about evaporation and condensation in today's lesson. In the next lesson, we will be learning on the importance of water to life processes and the impact of water pollution on Earth's water resources. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.